All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future-focused weekly update. I'm your host, Christopher Lind, and hopefully if I'm doing my job well with these, I'm keeping you ahead of the intersection of business technology and the human experience. I've got my usual 4 topics that I want to run down, but before I do, I just want to thank everybody who watches, listens, follows this, reads my Substack, wherever you end up consuming some of this from. I really do genuinely appreciate it. And it does actually have a heavy influence on what ends up making the mix for my topics and things like that. Actually, one of them, shout out to one of my subscribers who sent along the report that I'm actually unpacking related to AI automation and jobs that'll be in this week. So thank you for that. If you would, please like, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, whatever platform you're using. It's different on everyone, but you get the gist of it, and share it with somebody who might benefit from it. I appreciate it a lot, and keep in touch because I want to keep this relevant and meaningful to all of you. Okay, so I've got 4 things. This week is a little bit different. So one is I'm just going to open on a really practical awareness thing and then give some context to something that's getting, I think, some unnecessary hype. I'm going to get into the AI and job impact and automation and a breaking change with OpenAI, a new product out that is stirring up some noise related to automation. And then the final one, I want to end on a happy note this week. I know the past few weeks have been a little heavier than usual. It's like the end, you're like, and the quantum apocalypse. So there you go. So this week I thought I'd end on a positive note because I think there's some good news too. And I don't always do enough of that because my goal is to just help you not end up in a bad spot. But so let's jump into it. Let's get started. So the first one is there's been a recent bunch of buzz around LIDAR, which I'll explain what LIDAR is, ruining camera sensors, which now is starting to draw some conspiracies around what this could mean. And, there's all these autonomous cars, and it'll make sense as I start unpacking this. But I want to talk about this because if you aren't familiar with LIDAR, it's not new, but it stands for light detection and ranging. And it's a laser technology that uses light to measure distance and depth. And where you may have seen some of this stuff really changing things is it shoots out just an immense amount of light pulses all over the place that penetrate really heavy depth things. And so it can create a really, really robust map of what's around. You've seen this, like they've mapped the bottom of the ocean. They've mapped the Titanic. They've mapped what's underneath the jungle surfaces, so that they can find ancient ruins. I mean, it's super powerful, and it's really a laser emitting this stuff. So one of the big ones, now it's been around since like the 1960s. So if you're like, LIDAR is this new thing, not really, but it really was in the last 10 to 15 years that the cost came down, its effectiveness became more practical. It really used to be more of a government military type thing. And then it started making its way into urban planning and some of this other stuff. Really in 2010 and beyond is when all of a sudden autonomous cars and all this other stuff, drones, other things like that need to understand its environment. You need to have eyes, and LIDAR is a really, really effective, actually more effective than cameras for having eyes into what it can see, which then can be translated over to AI so that it can determine, do you hit the brakes? Do you not hit the brakes? A really popular example, if you're not familiar with it, it's a bit controversial, and I don't think it should be because I know Mark, and he was not intending, I don't believe at all, to be controversial, but he was testing Tesla's camera system versus a competitor's LIDAR system in autonomous vehicles, and how good does it perform in different conditions. And LIDAR crushes it. Comically, the highlight is Mark Rober sets up almost a Roadrunner-esque type fake wall, and the camera system, the Tesla camera system, just plows right through it because it can't tell it's fake. And the LIDAR can, because it can see there's actually a wall there where a camera would not be able to detect that. So he took some heat for that. But really what he was proving is like LIDAR can cut through fog. It can cut through different situations. It can see better in areas. It's not bothered by reflections and things because it's truly laser penetrating and laying a map out. Now you might be going, Christopher, this is a big lesson in LIDAR. what's your point? Well, it's often the things that we don't think about that are the kinds of things I try and raise awareness about, so we start to think about this. Because for a moment, think about anybody who's ever worked with lasers, or even if you've had a kid with a laser pointer, what's the first thing you tell them? Don't point it at somebody's eyes, right? Because lasers are notoriously known for being very harmful on damaging our eyes. Now, this is where the conspiracy or kind of the overhype comes in. Recently, at a car show or something like that, and it's been documented in this, these LIDAR systems have completely fried people's camera phones and like high dollar photography equipment at some auto shows. And it started creating all this buzz because it was like, wait a minute here. I thought this LIDAR was supposed to be safe. Why is it frying cameras? And then, of course, naturally, people's next conclusions are, wait, is this going to fry people's eyeballs? Because if you understand how LIDAR works, if there's autonomous cars driving all over the place, there's no escaping it. You can't not be getting hit with this. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up was, one, to create awareness to it so you can just be more conscious of it. Like, hey, be careful with your phone. More specifically, if you're at like an auto show where they're doing something like that, because some of the things that isn't super clear yet is, how dangerous is this? Now, I may be getting a little bit too specific for some of you, but laser beams run on different frequencies. Certain frequencies are more dangerous than others. The latest, the more modern LIDAR systems run on a frequency that runs at like, I think it's like 1500 or 1550. You don't need to understand the whole scale, but the point is, it's operating at a frequency that's supposed to be safe for the human eye. It's supposed to be safe for cameras and things like that. They used to run at a wavelength that was lower, more like 900 or something like that. And I think the threshold for danger is 1400. Please don't quote me on this. I'm trying to just give you a sense of what's going on, not be hyper specific and detailed on numbers. So please withhold the comments of, well, Christopher, actually it's 1337. I'm not trying to make a point of exactly what it is. I'm trying to say that the current ones run at this 1500-ish range. The data out there says, I believe anything under 1400 is where you start getting into danger zones, and older ones used to run at a lower one, more like 900 and something. So hopefully by now you can start to see how, one, when all of a sudden it started frying cameras, it did create some concern and some hype around, oh my gosh, we thought this was safe. Now we're seeing cameras get fried. Well, yes, and there is some things that they do. This is raising concerns of like, we probably need to look into this because they zoom in on this, and a sensor got fried. It put a bunch of colorful dots all over the image that was permanent. It ruined their phone, and then somebody else did it, and they were able to do it on like a high def Sony DSLR type thing. So it literally is burning out the lenses on cameras. Now, to be clear, does this mean, oh my gosh, never use your camera in public because a LIDAR system might blast you and nuke your phone or your camera? To date, I don't see any evidence for that. So in terms of fueling the hype and the paranoia of, oh my gosh, if you go outside, your camera's ruined. I've seen some of those articles and I'm like, come on, that's not what's happening here. That's not really how the tech works. There is definitely something we need to better understand about, is this a malfunction of the technology? Because there is some evidence that shows lower cost versions, or when people try to cut corners, some of the laser radiation or whatever you want to call it that's coming out can be harmful. So there is some of that. There's clearly, obviously, if you're in really close proximity to this, can potentially cause damage to, for sure, cameras. That's undisputed, that it can cause damage to cameras. What they still don't have any, I did do some research into this, and I only found one very loosely documented case where they believe somebody's eyes might have been impacted by this, but there's not even enough details to say for sure. So if you're seeing hype that autonomous vehicles are going to make everybody blind, don't buy into that. Should you maybe be a little more cautious if you're in a city that has, a LIDAR driven autonomous vehicle and you're like, oh man, I'm going to do a live stream of me like up close right next to this. You might want to think twice about it, just because this thing might fry your camera lens and that you can't fix it once it's fried, type of a thing. So practically speaking, like, you probably don't want to like stick your face right up next to the LIDAR thing and stare in it or try and videotape it. From what I can tell, our eyes are not impacted by these well-manufactured, eye-safe versions of it. They are less likely, and there are not, that I can find, cases showing that it causes damage. The older industrial ones that ran on the like 900 range, they were very different, and they had the power and they ran on the frequency. They could be damaging. So, if you're in an environment, don't go, well, Christopher told me LIDARs are fine, and now you go fry your eyes on an industrial site because you heard that. That's not what I'm saying. But I don't want people freaking out about it, while at the same time being aware this kind of stuff, you might hear this now. You might go, oh my gosh, what are the implications of this? Does this mean, some things? I do think it's something that we need to continue looking into, because this to me would be an example of something where might we have thought, oh yeah, this is totally safe, and now we're discovering, hey, there may be some use cases, there may be some situations, especially since we didn't necessarily think about it on scale. What could happen if all of a sudden we've got, every vehicle on the road pumping out LIDAR beams? Because part of the reason LIDAR is supposed to be safe is it's doing very flash pulses. So if you've ever seen how LIDAR works, it's this very rapid, thousands per second of these pulses. So given that, it's designed that even if it were to hit your eye, it's being hit in such a short frequency, it's not, it's not burning your eyes, type of a thing. But if you have thousands of those things running all at once, does it open up the possibility that, well, maybe if you're getting hit by, maybe only one vehicle is hitting you for 1,000th of a second, but if there's 1,000 vehicles, what might that do? Sure. And I think we need to look into that. Is there evidence of this that we need to freak out, or do we need to, create paranoia? No. But definitely there is risk to camera sensors that is now for sure confirmed. So just be careful of that. If you, and I will tell you right now, it's not exactly easy. There's not going to be like a LIDAR symbol. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I saw this one, and already I was seeing the news about, oh my gosh, everybody's going to be blind by 2026 when these vehicles are out on the road. And I'm like, I don't know that that's really an accurate thing. But again, if people start shortcutting things, they're trying to do it more inexpensive, or as there's thousands and thousands of these vehicles out, is there the potential? Yeah. And it's something that we need to investigate further. But thought I'd bring it to your attention because maybe there's a car person who listens to this who's about to go to a car show and is planning on, taking a bunch of pictures of these things, and hey, just be aware of it. So there you go. Low risk type of a thing, but wanted to draw attention to it. So let's transition a little bit to something a little more serious. So SHRM, if you're not familiar with SHRM, it's the Society of HR Management or something like that is what it stands. I don't even know if my name for the acronym's right, but it's a huge HR association. Okay. Human Resources Association. They do tons of data. They put out tons of certifications, all this. And one of the reports or the data briefs they put out was a report on the jobs at risk in U.S. employment with the age of automation. So if you want to go look it up, you can look it up. It's called Jobs at Risk, U.S. Employment in the New Age of Automation. And really what it did was it was a detailed breakdown of assessing, we're hearing all this hype and all this noise about AI is going to take all our jobs. It's going to take everyone's jobs. It's going to whatever. And, it's creating a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of this stuff. And then, so it's like, well, is there merit to that? So I dug through the report. And And so I wanted to share my response and reaction to it, because I think in some ways it can be helpful. I think in some ways, I don't know. I mean, I get they're basing this on data, but the one thing I know about the association and some of this stuff is it's not necessarily objective, and it's also data coming out of HR, which isn't necessarily as close and tied to the business as some of the business leaders are. So I've just been around the block long enough to know that sometimes what HR thinks isn't necessarily where the business is. So I want to kind of give some context around what this is. But what they came out to say was their big headline was 12% of US employment is at high or very high risk for total automation displacement. Okay, so when you're looking at the factors of this, when they say 12, it was like 12.6 or 12.3. I get the numbers mixed up in my head. But ultimately, just a little over 10%. Okay, so for every 100 jobs, 12 of them will literally are on the chopping block to be at high risk or very high risk for complete elimination. I'm looking at the chart right here. It's more like 2% are very high. So 2 out of 100 jobs are basically, according to this report, it's like they just straight up aren't going to exist. 10% are on the high. Okay, so it's close to 13%. But anyway, so that's how it breaks down. Then you kind of get into the moderate. Moderate's more like 25%. Slight is 23.9%. And then negligible is 40%. So when you think about the data through that sense, what I don't like about the report, I'm just sharing my thoughts based on conversations I have in executive advisory and board meetings where things are coming up like this. I don't necessarily think the numbers are completely skewed if you're looking at it on a macro level. So if you were to just look across all jobs, all industries, all functions, I actually think this probably is a fairly accurate assessment of where I would probably benchmark based on anecdotal conversations and things. Like the number of jobs that people are going, yeah, that's just not even going to exist anymore. We're not even going to have that. I would say that is probably pretty minimal in terms of like 2% where people are already very confident that's just gone. And I do think the 10% is pretty close to accurate in terms, and again, when I'm defining this, I don't know, based on the report, it's an HR report, so it's very risk averse, so they don't make a lot of bold statements. So you're not going to read the report and go, so are they saying those jobs won't exist or they will exist? They're not going to come out and straight say that. The way I understand the report and what I would agree with is that in that rough range, I would say about 2% of actual jobs, there are plenty of people just going, yeah, we're not even going to have that anymore. And then about 10% people were like, it might exist, but it may be so negligible, or it may be changed so much so that, we don't even need to think about it. It's just maybe a little further down the road. I'd say those 10% are probably the ones people in their heads are going, we're going to automate it. It's just we aren't there yet. I think that's fair. I think what the report doesn't necessarily represent, and where we're seeing some of the hype around it, is those jobs that are in the high to very high. For some companies, that is the whole company. And so what I find is in a lot of the news where you see hype about, mass downsizing, you'll see companies, they're getting rid of 20%, 25% of the workforce as a direct result of AI. You go, how can you get to rid of 20% and then say only 2% of the jobs? Well, a lot of times when I look at the companies that are being impacted by this, their whole company or a large part of their company is that very high risk thing. So when a large part of your company is that very high risk thing, the percentage is going to get skewed. In general, would I agree that probably most organizations, I would actually say many organizations are struggling to even figure out how to go about doing the elimination stuff. And so in some ways, I don't want to give people too much confidence, but in some ways, I would actually say it's less about are the jobs eligible for AI automation and risk, and more are the organizations ready to actually do it. Now, if you were to rate those things, I think you would see two very different scales, because I think people can generally start to say, I see a lot of risk here, not much risk here, this and that. But even the ones where they go, that job is absolutely going to be automated. Most companies I talk to, if you're like, so are you ready to do that? They're like, oh no, like we're not even close to that yet. We're thinking about it. What you're seeing in the news and some of the hype around it is some companies are going, well, we just know that's where we're going, so we're just going to rip off the Band-Aid and hope we'll figure it out. And I told you I'm ending on a positive note, so stick around and listen for that, because if you hear that and panicked, I've got some encouraging news for you. Now, what was interesting in the report, and it's something that you'll want to dig into as well, and I'd encourage you to explore it, was they actually broke it down by where are what industries. So they got into some of the industries, which was really interesting to see, like where were some of the highest risk things. And what's interesting is business and financial is actually the highest, which I think is very unsettling, and which is why you're seeing so much hype around it right now, is that historically has been seen as untouchable. Kind of the corporate finance, business leadership, operational role, that's been seen as like, yeah, that can't get automated. Well, all of a sudden, generative AI has changed that significantly. And so business operations roles suddenly are like on the chopping block. So like they're of the 19.9%, like the way they, risk of automation. Because again, now I'm breaking it down further. So the first one was just at a macro level, what it would look like, only 10%, and then the 2% very high. Then it drilled into those high, very high, and said, now where is that split? Like, where does that look from an industry standpoint? And as you get into that, it's like business and financial ops was at the top. Production was at the top. One of the things I thought was really interesting was protective service, which speaks to some of this automation of robotics and things like that. A lot of the AI systems to be able to detect, even just having physical robots doing some of that. So it was interesting seeing what was at the top of the pile. And I think that's where there's a lot of unsettling news for people, is there's some things in this mix, production, as in like supply chain manufacturing. I don't necessarily think that always surprises people, because they go, well, yeah, we're going to have machines building more stuff. We're seeing more with robots do some of that. When all of a sudden business and financial tops the charts, I think that's why you're seeing people go, we weren't really planning that type of a thing. And so if you wanted to go, all the way down, but even if you look into it, like farming and forestry is way up there. So to some of the people I talked to who are like, oh, this is not going to be touched. I mean, building and grounds maintenance was a double digits type of a thing. So there were some industries that interestingly were, I think a lot of people went, oh, holy cow. Like there's some industries that historically would have never made this list that are now on the list. And I think that's why there's more hype associated with this automation, not so much that the risk isn't there or we haven't been automating things in the past. And so I think thinking about this critically is really important as you go into it. Now, I think as we break this down, I want to give some kind of perspective for how people should be thinking about this. What I wouldn't want somebody to walk away from is the idea that, oh, okay, so really what you're saying, Christopher, is there's really only like 1 to 1.2 out of 10 people whose jobs are very much at risk. I still, despite this report, stand behind the fact that everybody's job is going to be displaced by AI in some capacity. Okay, the job you have today will not be the job you have in 2 years. And I really don't care what industry you're in. I don't care what field you're in. It really doesn't matter. The people who are adopting AI and figuring out where AI makes sense are going to come and cannibalize that and redefine the jobs. So to the people who are resistant and go, well, I think I'm in the negligible or slight category, so I'm not going to worry about that. What I'm telling you is someone is doing that job right now and figuring out where AI is helping them. I had an interesting call with a good friend of mine who's in real estate, and he was talking about some of the inspection stuff that he does. And my whole point was, I know real estate agents that are looking at how to equip drones and schedule them to go do some of the inspection work ahead of time. So they only have to send somebody in and they can do 10 in a day rather than 3. Yes, that would probably be something that would fall into the negligible category, but somebody's figuring out how to use AI to do it, and they're going to eat your lunch if you're not also doing it. So to the people who are resistant, I just really do want to push you to say, you need to be thinking about this. And again, it doesn't mean, I've said this before, it doesn't mean you have to be the AI person. But what it does mean is if you're not, then you have to develop what is your competitive edge that so stands out that when somebody comes around and goes, I can do it for less or I can do it for faster, people are going to go, I'm going to stick with you because, and it can't just be because a person does it. That's just not going to hold water, or it's not, unless you're really just going to be an S-tier person who only works with the people with the financial resources to do it. And they can go, I can pay a premium to have a person do it. And of course, I'd rather have a person do it. The vast majority of people who are already financially and economically strapped, they're going to go with the person who can do it for a fraction of the cost because they've brought AI in. So it's just more about understanding, well, who's your market? What are you trying to do? How's this going to fit together so that you can make a decision? And ultimately knowing, just because this report says only 12% are high or very high, doesn't mean that, it's only going to affect a certain portion of the population. It's moving slower than I think some people anticipated, but I think in other ways it's moving faster than some people anticipated. So my advice is on the, employee side. If you're an employee, a leader, whatever you are, I think the data is clear. There's really nobody who, even the 40% that are negligible, I tried to dig into it a little more. I'm like, negligible how? To say it's, to me, this is a HR misunderstanding of how work really happens. I don't think anybody will be negligibly impacted by AI. I think everybody will moderately or high impacted by AI. It's just a matter of, the time you'll have to adapt, what it will look like, and how much of a priority it is for your company. There's some jobs that companies just go, it's not really worth us taking the time to understand what AI can do and then trying to make the adjustment. So we're just not going to spend the time on. We could, it's just not worth it for us to take the time. Because the reality is, and this can hopefully bring some peace of mind to folks, is that it still takes time. There's, as much as the marketing hype out there is saying you can just buy this agent, flip a switch, and magically you don't need people anymore, which you'll hear about when I talk about it later. It doesn't work that way. And companies are finding that out. And so they're having to be selective of where they're choosing. And I think that's why we're starting to see the pyramid flip in terms of where are they going. Well, now they're starting to look at some of these high cost roles that historically have been untouchable that now are becoming much more automatable. And it's giving people an opportunity to do this. Now, if you're a business leader, this is where this report may be helpful for you to start thinking about, hey, where does this actually look? And in two ways. One, if you're a business leader and going, we absolutely can automate everything, this report should bring you back down to earth and go, oh, maybe not. Maybe the hype and all the noise about we can do this everywhere, maybe we need to think a little more carefully about it. But it also should be something that business leaders, if you're in an industry where you thought, oh, nobody's going to touch this stuff, it's like, really? Because I guarantee I know lots of people in some of these industries that historically have been untouchable, that now it's like, yeah, it's at the top of the pile for high displacement risk. So if you're a business leader making decisions about it, you need to be paying attention. Now listen till the end, because I'm going to tell you why. Be very careful how you do that. But I do think it's something that nobody can sit and be complacent. And I think this report highlights that. But I would be careful about some of the things that I'm seeing come out of this that are just being, broadcast, because I'm seeing it used all over the place. I'm seeing things that basically 12% of people are going to be out of work by 2026. And I'm like, okay, that's not what this report's seeing. Then I'm also seeing the flip of that, that's saying, oh, for all the hype, actually only 2% of jobs are actually at risk of being disrupted by AI. And I'm like, that's actually not what it's saying at all. And I actually don't agree with the report in its assessment that, there's such a large amount that are negligible, as in terms of, oh yeah, AI doesn't even affect it. It's like, no, there's nobody that's actually negligible. So encourage you to check it out. If you like looking at reports and the details, you can actually get into how they actually calculated this. I'm not going to break down their calculation, but based on where they're getting the data and the group that I know is doing it, that's where I would say it's a helpful indicator. I would not necessarily bring this into a board meeting and say, this is how we're going to make a decision now. So with that, so now let's talk about, I talked about, where you're seeing these big swaths and it's creating some major hype and it's really blowing things up, and kind of the flipped pyramid of industries. OpenAI came out with what's being called Codex. It's a specially designed coding agent that I have seen all the apocalyptic news headlines about this thing. This is going to be a world killer. It's going to be the end of human coding. They're not even going to be humans writing code anymore. They're not going to be doing any software engineering. Is going to be a job that goes away, like the telephone operator type of a thing. What they've come up with, so just to give you some context around this, if you talk to software engineers, they have been very open about the fact that AI has not been super great at complex coding. It might help get some of the basics done, but it airs out quite a bit. It's not good for necessarily debugging things. And there's been a lot of emphasis on how do we make AI better at that? Because as mysterious and smoke and mirrors as that field is, there's a lot of stuff that is actually very robotic. If you've never been a coder, to anybody who thinks they know how it works, it's not what a lot of people think. And there's a lot of just mundane, tedious, boring debugging code, trying to figure out where the heck the thing broke, trying to figure out what you need to fix, running things through. I mean, it's very boring and robot. It's the reason that I got into software engineering. And then after I was like, yeah, okay, I can do this, but like, this is not for me. Might I change course now with AI there to help with it? Sure. But historically, it hasn't been really great at this. So while there's been a lot of hype and we've seen a lot of companies go, oh, well, AI is writing, X number amount of our code, so we're cutting back our software engineers. It hasn't necessarily been the game changer or the, death to the industry that everybody was predicting. Codex is at least being projected to be more of that. Because and this is where it gets a little controversial. It has been trained, and people are like, what data is it being trained? Where is it getting this data? But it's being trained on human coding in great detail. So instead of these kind of big general models that are designed to be able to do everything, it's really designed to be a closed system that is specialized in generating code and writing code. And so, as you can imagine, something that's specially built for that purpose is going to be much more effective at it than, say, a general purpose thing. You go to ChatGPT and ask it to write some code, and it spits you back something. It's like, well, that's terrible type of a thing. Well, yeah, because it wasn't necessarily designed for that intent. Codex is, which is stirring all sorts of things up. So some of the controversy around this is like, where did you get this code? Did you get consent for all this code? Is this essentially just stealing people's IP and their capability, turning it into AI, and then eliminating their jobs? That's some of the hype that we're hearing about it. In reality, this could be very disruptive. Now, there's not enough out to show how it actually performs in practice yet. So while a lot of the hype is this is the end of the human software engineer, I don't think we have enough data to say for sure it is. But why would you say this is, why would companies be so focused on this? Well, companies pay a lot of money to people in these roles for what, and I know the software engineer people that are going to get mad at me for this, but a lot of the work that is done in that field is very just robotic and tedious. There's nothing super magical or creative about debugging code or trying to, test runs on your code to see where it breaks. It's just kind of the monotonous going through it. But historically, there's been a very limited number of people who had the technical chops to be able to do it. So you could command a pretty penny if you were good at it. And now, going back to what I've said before, companies were spending buco bucks on having loads of these people to keep their competitive edge up. And suddenly now AI is able to perform a lot of this stuff. So of course, why do you think companies are prioritizing offloading some of that? Well, they're spending a ton of money on it, and they're starting to become much more aware that it's not all the magic that it's been represented. And they're realizing, wait, that's what a lot of the activity, that's what we're paying $350,000 a year for people to spend their time doing. And so this is where you're seeing some of the tension in the industry. And if I've got some, people in the industry, I'm not saying it with disrespect, like, oh, what you do can be automated and AI should do it. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, for a very long time, it's just been positioned as we don't know anything about it. We know we need to have it. We know there's only a special skill set group of people who can do it. So give them whatever money they want. Don't ask any questions and let them run with it. And you can only do that for so long before eventually a company goes, this isn't sustainable and we need to do something about it. And that's why there's been so much emphasis on companies going, all right, we need to do this. And Codex is looking to become that. Now, like I said, it's not the first. Gemini's been doing a ton. Anthropic's been doing a ton. There's a bunch of companies out there specializing on this, but Codex just happens to be the one making a ton of news this week. So what does this mean for software engineers? I do think kind of the heydays of software engineering are going to come back to earth. And I don't think you can get mad at this, but I think they need to. It's kind of been one of those things that it ballooned. It was like the housing market in the early 2000s. Like it got to a point where it's like, you're a junior software engineer. You've been doing this for a couple of years. You're making $300,000 to debug basic level codes just because nobody else is around to do it. So that's not sustainable. Companies can't afford to do it. And now AI is actually getting pretty good at it. So as much as people may not be happy that I'm saying, I think in some ways this is needed, it is. It's got out of hand, and companies are prioritizing it and they're doing something about it. And the tech actually has the ability to do it. So if you are in the software engineering, field and you've been complacent, this is going to have a real impact. So be careful, be aware. Do I think it means this is the end of human coders? I don't. This is an area that I think will get right-sized, not wiped out. So as much as all the hype is saying this is the end of coding and human coders, it's all just going to be done by machines. No, because I know some brilliant software engineers, and they know that their skill and their gift is not writing the code. That's not actually what makes them amazing. It's about knowing where to look for the bugs. It's about knowing how to connect the dots between what needs to happen and the actual software and its capabilities. It's about these other things that are less about actual writing code. And so the people who are really good at that, do they need to worry about their jobs? No. The people I think that do need to be concerned who are in this industry are the ones who they know the basics. They don't necessarily think super critically. They write code and they think, machines can't ever do this. I'm smarter than the machines. Yeah, those are the ones that I think are very much at risk. And I'm seeing that consistently with big tech companies wiping out large swaths of their things. Now, I don't like that I'm seeing that. I think when the rug gets pulled out, it is painful, and I wish there were better ways to do it. I just unfortunately think what happened was, just like would I wish the 2008 or whatever housing market crash would happen? No, I wish we could have avoided it. But given what we did in the early 2000s, you're kind of like, well, how else would you do it? And I feel like that's what we've seen in software engineering. It blew up. It became such a premium. Everybody had to have it. Nobody really knew what it was. You couldn't really go to a competitor type of a thing. And so it just grew to a point where I think the balloon is about to pop. it's already popping, to be quite honest. It's blown a leak and it's blowing things out. I think this also opens up things for a lot of people, where people who have not been able to do much because they haven't had technical skills, if you've been a small business or things like that, now it opens the door for, I think, people to become more digital in their work without necessarily having to be like, well, we can't do it because we can't afford to have a $300,000 a year software engineer on staff that we don't know what they do. We just know they sit in a room behind a computer all the time. That those days are going to be gone, to be completely honest. So we'll see what happens, though. I'm interested to see how Codex performs when I actually start seeing some of the data around what's its performance, how well does it handle. Of course, you're going to see the software people go, it's still garbage. And you're going to have the people on the other end going, it can do away with all the jobs. We don't even need people in this field anymore. It's a dead field. I think reality is going to be somewhere in between. All right. So now let's talk about the happy news. I told you I was going to close on a happy note. And I think this is a happy note that helps balance out some of this job risk, automation, things like Codex, for the people who are kind of freaking out and going, oh my gosh, is this the end? Like, are there going to be any jobs left? I actually hope that the SHRM report at least gave some comfort. That's like, look, it didn't say 90% of jobs are at very high risk for automation. And I think if it did, I would say automation in terms of elimination is not going to be around. That would be ridiculous. Where I disagree with it is I think it's probably more like 90, 99, 95% of jobs are going to be significantly influenced by it. Sure. But hopefully that calmed anybody's anxiety down. I shared, leaders, you need to be paying attention because you're not immune to this. But I think this last one was an article coming out, and I've been seeing this happen already. Now, I talked about, just watch. Duolingo was copying, the Shopify thing where AI first, all this stuff. Well, it's blowing up. Now, this started 2 years ago. One of the companies that I was following for a bit, they were kind of one of the big ones, that they said, we're an AI first workplace. We're only doing this. I mean, Klarna went all in on it for a while. He was kind of a guinea pig, where basically froze everything, eliminated tons of jobs, basically tried to replace everything with AI. Duolingo was, kind of following on Shopify's heels. And, Klarna was bragging about it for a while. They're like, oh, we've got AI doing the work of 700 agents. We don't even need people anymore. And they were bragging. And I'm like, that's not going to last. Well, it's starting to show its true colors. So I end this on a positive note, and also as a cautionary tale to business leaders who may be thinking, hey, so do I jump on this AI first bandwagon? You might want to look how Klarna and Duolingo is doing right now, and it may at least caution you to not send out that CEO email saying we're freezing all hiring and we're going to be an AI first company. You may want to tread a little differently for two reasons. So Klarna, first of all, is quickly realizing that this AI first thing is not as cheap as they thought. So all this money they swore they were going to save, AI is doing the work of 700 people. We don't need people. It's costing us next to nothing. Unfortunately, the cost is starting to show up, and it's like, oh, this actually is quite expensive, and we're getting a much lower quality product in the end. So it turns out, they were really heavy on like the customer service stuff. Well, what do you know? As much as we were told AI can take care of all your customer service stuff, it's like what I saw with the large grocery chain that I collaborated with, who thought, hey, we're just going to make AI checkout for everybody. And it turned out people didn't really want AI checkout for everything. And it was actually a really bad experience, and it was costing them a lot. And they were having a lot of failure and a lot of loss and all this other stuff that they hadn't considered. Klarna is quickly learning that same lesson. They're learning that turns out this isn't quite what we thought. So then you got Duolingo, who is a little bit earlier in the game in actually executing on some of this stuff, but the blowback on them is massive. It is massive. Duolingo is getting just lit on fire on social media. They're losing, brand credibility. They're feeling some of the pain of, okay, maybe we didn't turn everything over, and now we're feeling the financial cost. We're feeling some of these other things. Duolingo's feeling like the PR, the brand credibility, just overall sentiment of the world is just completely crushing them. I mean, and people are outspoken about it. Now, do I think all of it is fair? Not necessarily, because I think some of this is just coming from people are hyped up. They're paranoid. They're freaking out. So when they hear a company go, hey, guess what? We're all in. People aren't real happy about that. And you got to remember, those people are your customers. So if they suddenly go, oh, you're one of those companies, yeah, Duolingo is finding out that like, oh, that doesn't go so well, which affects revenue, which affects our customer base. People are deleting their accounts. People are, making it impossible for us to hire people that we actually need because they're destroying our brand. All this other stuff is starting to just totally blow up. And this has all happened in the past few weeks. I mean, not all of it has blown up in the past few weeks, but a lot of things are coming out about this. So where does that leave us? I think on an encouraging note. Like I said, I want to end on an encouraging note. So I'll start with the leaders. To the business leaders, please, you need to evaluate and consider AI and think about it carefully. You need to do it, but you need to do it very carefully and very thoughtfully and with a lot of wisdom and discernment. By the way, as a plug, I am in the process right now of developing something to help companies assess how to do that well and whether their people are even capable of executing this well, that I hope will bring some comfort to people and just be able to know, like, how ready am I? Like, am I ready to handle this? Are we ready as a company to handle this? So I think that'll help. But please don't just pull the trigger on going AI first. Not only might it blow up in your face from a brand standpoint, but you may just completely find we just spent a ton of money for a worse product and a worse outcome. And now what do we do? And now I'm telling you, Klarna is going to have a hard time. Like they're trying to recover from this, being like, oh, now we've discovered we've lost our way. We want to focus on the human touch. There was a quote from them that I was like, yeah, this is just PR. Oh yeah, like we really want to invest in the quality of human support. So they're like trying to recover from this, but unfortunately, you've kind of already shown your hand. You've shown that when you're promised a cheap, easy fix, you'll go for it, even at the cost of people, that then people are like, yeah, you can try and go, oh, we made a mistake. We're going to recover from this. People are just much less willing to do it. So if you are a leader who hasn't done that yet, please don't. Save yourself the pain and the headache. I'm not saying avoid AI. I'm saying slow it down and figure out how to do it the right way, or it's going to cost you. And all the shining examples of what the glory stories look like are not so shiny. And we're seeing that firsthand now. So be aware of that. To the people, to the employees, to the people who are just feeling overwhelmed and just feel like, is this the end of jobs and work as a whole? I think this is an example that it is not, and we will adapt to it. It is going to move slower than I think many predicted. It's going to move faster in some areas than many are predicting, but it is going to overall move slower. So if you're going to bed wondering, what am I even going to do in the world tomorrow? Is AI just going to do everything I can do? No, it's not. And it's not going to be able to. You're going to have to change the work you do. Where you spend your time is going to need to change. But does it mean that the value you offer to an organization, the skills you've spent decades building, are gone forever and, just consumed by an AI agent who's now going to execute it just as, if not more flawlessly than you can? No. But I think now is the time to get surgical and figure out where are the things and what does my role look like? Where do I, regardless of what role I'm in, where do I lean into this? And this is where I had this conversation with a friend of mine the other day who was very AI resistant in his business. And I was able to kind of talk him through some areas where I go, yeah, but this isn't actually adding value and your people are spending a ton of time doing it. Why not automate that so your people have more time to free this up? And as he started to see some of these things, it became more clear how he could do this in a way that was good for his employees, good for his business, and good for his customers. And it's totally possible to thread that needle. And so if anything, I want to close with the idea that there is a way to do this well. Anybody who thinks it's like one or the other, either we're just going to burn the world down and it's going to be dystopian, or we just have to do away with AI. It's like that. No, it's not a binary choice. There's ways that you can do this well. And that's why I create this content. That's why I do what I do, to try and help people see how to do that. So those are some of the latest things happening. I hope you found this helpful, just thinking through some of this stuff. Yeah, hang in there. I get lots of people are stressed. They're overwhelmed. They're freaking out a little bit. And I understand why, but we'll get through it one step at a time. We always do adjust, and I have no doubt we will figure it out. And yeah, it's changing every week. Talk to me next week. Maybe next week I'll have a different opinion, but we'll see what happens. With that, we will talk to you later.